folks. All right, and that was a minute. Welcome, everyone, to the National Press Club, the place where news happens. My name is Emily Wilkins, and I am a correspondent with CNBC. And I am very eager and excited tonight to welcome David Rubenstein to the National Press Club. Obviously, David, you've got a very long resume. We could go through it all. The investments that you've done with Carlyle Group, the role that you've played in politics, the Orioles, and becoming a manager of that team, your hometown baseball team. And tonight, of course, we also want to discuss your new book that is on the presidents and the presidency, which I have written down on this page in front of me, and now I cannot. Highest Calling. Thank you. I'm ready for this. And I mean, really, I could go through the whole thing that you've done. You yourself are a prolific interviewer, interviewing a number of people on Bloomberg, on PBS, in person at a number of events. But I wanted, of course, to maybe start off tonight with what I know a number of us are here to talk about, which is your book, The Highest Calling. And I just wanted to give you the floor for a couple minutes. And why this book? Why now? It feels like we're in a moment where the presidency is particularly divisive. So why a book called The Highest Calling at this exact moment?
Well, some people, thank you very much for inviting me here, and thank you all for taking the time to listen to me. Some people were surprised by the title of the book, because for many years I have said the highest calling of mankind is private equity. But as I was thinking about the book and writing it, I was kind of thinking, the truth is, the most important job in the world, as it's now evolved, is probably the presidency of the United States. And I was thinking about this after an interview I did with someone on Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson left the United States to help negotiate the end of World War I, the Treaty of Versailles. And he left the United States for more or less 6 months. And I came back to the United States, but overall, he was out of the country for 6 months. Can you imagine a president of the United States today leaving the country for 6 months at a time? But when he went to Paris the first time, and he went over there for the Treaty of Versailles negotiations, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Parisians are cheering him in a way that nobody had ever seen anybody been cheered before. I was imagining like Julius Caesar, when he came back to Rome after a conquest, was cheered, but there weren't that many Romans compared to Parisians. So, and it really dawned on me that, at that time, the presidency became the most important job in the world, because everyone in Europe was looking to Woodrow Wilson to solve the European war, the Great War as it was then called. And since that time, while we've had some presidents that weren't as major figures as others, FDR and other presidents since then have all been the most important person in the world. And you could say that seeking the job of the presidency is really seeking the highest calling. Because what is the most important thing you can do in the world is to help other people. And who can help the most people and damage the most people? And who can make the world a better place more than the President of the United States? Probably nobody. So that's why I called it The Highest Calling. And I interviewed many people for it. As some of you may know, I worked in the White House as a young man. I got inflation to 19%, and that's why we didn't get reelected, probably. It's hard to do. I was only 27 years old. I didn't really know what I was doing in many respects, but I got the job because I worked in the campaign, and 3 years out of law school, I'm a blue-collar family in Baltimore, and all of a sudden I'm working in the White House advising the President of the United States. I'm going on Marine One, Air Force One. My parents were kind of shocked about it. I was shocked about it, too. Obviously, the voters were shocked about it because we lost the election. And then, ultimately, I always still retained my fascination with the presidency. I first became fascinated with it when I was a little boy in Baltimore. I was told that John Kennedy was going to be driving by a street near where I lived, and he was then a candidate to be President of the United States. And I thought maybe I could see this person, very famous then. And so I went to the street, and then John Kennedy drove by, and he waved, and I thought he was waving at me. I was sure he was. And then I just became fascinated with him, and later I went to work when I graduated from law school for the man who was his great intellectual guru and speechwriter and blood bank, some people would say, and that's Ted Sorensen. And I worked for him for a few years in the law firm that he was at. Then I came to Washington, and ultimately got lucky working in the campaign for President Carter, and the campaign won. And so ever since then, I've been fascinated by the presidency. If you live in Washington, obviously you know the presidency is a very important part of our fabric here. important part of the fabric of the whole country and the world. But those who live in Washington probably are paying more attention to the president than most people. And I've known many of the presidents. And for this book, I wanted to interview a lot of the presidents I'd known already and interview scholars about presidents. So it was really designed to kind of just say to people, here's a chance to think about the presidency, how important it is, how it's evolved. And here are some of the interviews that I did with presidents, like President Biden. I interviewed him while he was in the Oval Office. I interviewed President Trump, who wasn't then president. He was running for president, but I interviewed him for it. And I interviewed George Bush and Bill Clinton, among others. So, it's an easy read, I hope. And it's a book that gives people an appreciation of what presidents are like and why they're different and why some are better than others.
Interesting. And why they all look like they've aged 20 years by the time they get out.
Well, the people that write about them probably age more than the people that are the presidents. But it's a job that does age you. Very few people emerge with no lines, no gray hair, and so forth and so on. But you've got the pressures of the world. The war and peace is what you're dealing with almost every day. And so I've found over the years, and I would just say this about interviews, my books, this is my 5th book, my books are largely a poor man's way of writing a book. I write a summary of it, give my perspectives, but I have a lot of interviews, and I summarize the interviews, but I'm really using interviews. And the interview format is a relatively novel kind of approach in the grand span of history. We're engaging in interview here, but there are no interviews of Cleopatra. There are no interviews of William Shakespeare. Why? Because that format wasn't invented then. So, I'd love to have an interview, and maybe artificial intelligence will enable us to do this someday. I'd love to interview King Henry VIII and say, why didn't you just get a prenup rather than chop off the heads of your wives? Or Cleopatra, who was a better lover, Mark Antony or Julius Caesar? Or William Shakespeare, who actually wrote those plays? Tell us who wrote those plays. But I wondered whether with artificial intelligence someday we might be able to go back and do those interviews. I don't know. But it's a very good process. And with the interview format that we now engage in, I trace it back a bit to The Tonight Show. Some of you may be old enough to remember this. When The Tonight Show first started, it was with Steve Allen, then Jack Paar. Some of you are nodding your head. You're roughly my age, so you might remember this. Steve Allen, Jack Paar, then Johnny Carson. In the daytime, they began to have daytime interview shows, Phil Donahue and so forth. And Oprah became the most famous probably of them. And the reason it was popular is because people like to ask people questions, hear the answer. It's not a stilted speech. And so the format took off, and it's just unfortunate that we don't have interviews of George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. If I could interview anybody who ever lived, that'd probably be Abraham Lincoln, because in my view, he was the greatest president who ever lived, and he did some of the most historic things, but nobody ever interviewed him.
Which is interesting to think of. I mean, someone did, but they probably didn't write it down. You've had a front row seat, I mean, I guess literally since Kennedy with Carter going all the way through. I did want to ask a little bit about Trump, because you are someone who has had good relations with presidents of both parties, worked with lawmakers of both parties. I mean, when you compare and sort of compile all these interviews and all these historians, what can you say about Trump's leadership style? Because while, of course, there have been a lot of concerns about many aspects of his presidency, right. He just got this big bill done. I think at the moment, at least, Iran is seen as a win for him. What about his style has enabled him to do what he's done?
I first got to know Donald Trump this way. My parents were blue-collar workers in Baltimore. When my father could retire from the post office, he retired the first day he could retire. The blue-collar worker retired at the age of 55. I'm now 75, I'm still working. My father was 55 and retired. My parents moved to a suburb of Baltimore called West Palm Beach, Florida. And when they moved there, occasionally when I have wedding anniversaries or birthday parties or graduations, I would, when I have a big party, I'd go down to West Palm Beach, Florida, and I'd say, we're going to have a place to have a celebration. I would kind of go to a place called Mar-a-Lago. It wasn't political. I wasn't a member of it. But in those days, at least if you showed up with a credit card, you could, they would probably book you. And so I would have events there. And every time a tall guy kind of showed up and was in our family photos, and I got to know who he was. He was Donald Trump. And he said he'd heard of me from my investment business, and I got to know him a little bit. And then when I became the head of the Economic Club of Washington, my job was to get speakers to come in. I could interview them. And somebody said, why don't you get Donald Trump? And I said, well, I don't know. He's not really a person we have, he's a real estate developer in New York, and they said, no, he's got a TV show called The Apprentice. It's very popular. And so I invited him, and he wrote back and said he would come, and he came down. I think it was December of 2014 or 2015. And in the green room, he said, David, ask me anything you want, but for sure, ask me if I'm going to run for president. And I said, President what? He said, President of the United States. I was surprised that he was going to run for President of the United States because I didn't think a real estate person could do it, but I was obviously wrong. And I did have the interview. We had 800 people there. It was covered live on C-SPAN. And I've interviewed him a couple other times since then. In terms of answering your question, I don't think any president we've ever had has had as much power over as many parts of the government as he does now. I think FDR at the peak did not have much influence and sway with the federal courts. And he didn't get everything he wanted out of Congress. And he didn't have everybody in the executive branch pretty much doing what he wanted. Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, has more ability to get his executive branch to march to his tune than anybody I've seen as president. The legislative branch, while he has bare majorities in the House and the Senate, it's enough to get the big, beautiful bill through. And the judicial branch, he's got a lot of victories there, more than I would have thought, and he's won some things in the Supreme Court. So he has a leadership style that's different than other presidents. Everybody's different, unique. He has a style that's obviously worked for him. Other people might try it, might not work for them, but he's very unique. And I think we've never seen anything like this before, in my view.
Do you think, because I kind of agree with your point, that he really has a lot of control over lots of different parts of the government, but of course government was built on checks and balances. And over the years we've seen, as I say this as a congressional reporter, more power go to the presidency. And is that a good thing, that we've got one person who's got the highest calling and that there aren't as many checks on them as there might have been several decades back?
Well, it depends on if you like the policies or not. If you like the policies of a president, I guess it's a good thing. When the Constitution was being developed at the Constitutional Convention, Article 1 was the legislative branch, because the members of the Constitutional Convention considered the legislative branch to be more important than the executive branch, honestly. All they knew really was they didn't want a king, but they didn't know exactly what the president was going to be about. They didn't know how many terms he were going to have. They didn't know how long he could serve an individual term, and so forth. Ultimately, they resolved all this at the very end. There was a committee called the Committee on Unfinished Parts. And the Committee on Unfinished Parts came up with what we now have. It said president should serve a 4-year term. There were no limits on how many terms he could serve. There was a view for a while there should be limits, but there was no limits on it. And the president was given certain powers, but he wasn't given unlimited powers. He had to have the advice and consent of the Senate for certain things. But presidents have taken more power than maybe the founding fathers originally intended. Clearly, in foreign policy, presidents have taken the entire lead, and that's happened for more than a century now. Presidents probably have more power than the founding fathers ever envisioned, but I don't know that today, if they were living today, they would say it's not a good thing, because it's very hard to run a country as big as ours and have to get everything approved by Congress every single time. President Trump, whatever you might think about him, he's gotten a leadership style that has worked for him and gotten a lot of things done that he really wanted to get done. A lot of presidents haven't gotten things done. The big, beautiful bill is unique. I can't think of any president who got essentially his entire legislative program in one bill. Every president that I've ever written about or observed or talked to has gotten many different bills, and they can't get everything they want in every bill. President Trump got in this bill, I would say, a large part of everything he wanted. Didn't get everything, but almost everything he wanted. So it's a different leadership style, and we'll have to see what the results of the bill will be, but it's a unique style. It's obviously, you ask how he got able to do it, he's got the ability to say certain things that other presidents probably wouldn't have said, or try things other presidents wouldn't have said.
Yeah, taking risks, and it'll be interesting to see if other presidents try to emulate that. We also have a question from Washington Post from Paul Kane. What worries you most about the United States going forward in the next decade to 3 decades? Is it something, a financial number like the swelling federal debt? Is it something deeper about the overall American decline in stability, our nation pulling back from global affairs, both diplomatic and financially, in a way that makes the U.S. less of a global leader, or something else?
The question would be, what do I anticipate to be the biggest problem or challenge in the next 10 years or so?
Yes, I think that's a good.
Well, lots of challenges. Obviously, the United States, after World War II, dominated the world. We were 50% of the world's GDP, 50% of the world's GDP. And now we're maybe 16 to 18% of the world's GDP with 5% of the population. So after World War II, we basically set the terms of the post-world world. The UN, IMF, the World Bank, NATO, all organizations in the United States had a big hand in getting done. And as a result of those, and including the Marshall Plan as well, these are things the United States developed and really led and helped have a major impact on over all these years. Right? I'd say the United States doesn't have quite the ability we had after World War II to kind of tell people what to do. We have more rivals, and we probably have a rival in China for sure. They're much more complicated than the rival we had in the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union was more of a military rival and to some extent an ideological rival. They were not a big economic rival. Now we have an economic and technological rival in China and some other countries as well, but nothing comparable to what China is. I think the biggest challenges we'll face in the future are our ability to deal with the debt problem. We have a $36 to $38 trillion of debt. When I left the White House, it was roughly $800 billion, and that was thought to be high. Obviously, we've had a lot of debt, and now we're spending roughly $1 trillion at our annual budget on debt. So right now, the annual budget of the United States is roughly $7 trillion, and roughly $5 trillion of that is money that comes in from tax revenues and so forth, and $2 trillion we're borrowing. And you're borrowing $2 trillion every year. If you don't deal with that at some point, you're going to have more debt than you can handle. And how are you going to pay it off? Well, it's complicated to be paid off in any easy way. So the debt problem has to be dealt with. Historically, when you pay more in interest on the debt than you are on your defense spending, you are in trouble, and other civilizations have had that. And so if you don't deal with your debt problem at some point, you're going to have a bigger economic problem. Secondly, what flows from that is the dollar. The dollar has been the reserve currency of the world since World War II. We're the only reserve currency. When you're the only reserve currency, you can borrow a lot of money, and people really want to use your currency because that's how the world does economic matters. Oil is traded in dollars, for example. If the dollar weakens, our reserve currency status could be changed, and therefore it would be harmful to the economy. And if our debt situation goes out of control, it could weaken the dollar. So those are economic challenges. Third economic challenge is the big problem, in my view, is that you have income inequality that is rising, not sinking, and you also have a lack of social mobility. Now, let me explain the difference. Economic inequality means that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. But social mobility means that the people on the bottom have no chance of getting, or less of a chance to get to the top. The American dream is a phrase that was invented in 1931 by a writer. And Mike Milken just set up a museum that's opened on the 4th of July across from the Treasury called the Museum for the American Dream. And the American Dream means that people believe that you can come to the United States or be born here and work your way up and live in a country where you have a lot of opportunities, a lot of freedoms, a lot of liberties, but also a chance for economic success. Many people in this country today, born here in lower socioeconomic classes, do not believe that the American dream as much as they used to, and they don't think they can rise to the top. And therefore, the people that often believe in the American dream more than other people that are born here are people that come to this country as immigrants. We have now roughly 50 million immigrants in this country, a population of about 340 million people, 50 million immigrants. And if you take a look at some of the most successful people in the United States, they're immigrants. Some of the people, 1/3 of the CEOs running Silicon Valley countries are immigrants from India. Nothing wrong with that, but it just shows you that immigrants can do a lot of incredible things in this country, and we've had a lot of famous immigrants. Right now, I think we want to make sure that people in this country believe in the American dream as well, and that we can do things to moderate the lack of the income inequality problems we have and the social mobility problems where people don't think they can get to the top. Those are the biggest challenges the United States has.
It is interesting because I know, sort of thinking about some of the two things that you mentioned with the $36 trillion in debt, a lot of that does come from programs that we have like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and at the same point, we're seeing some of those programs, I guess Medicaid specifically, that are a bit of a safety net. Those might, if those programs are weakened, then you have perhaps difficulty with those at the bottom of the income ladder being able to work their way up to the top.
Well, think about Social Security. Social Security was set up in 1934. At that time, you could retire at the age of 65. The tax was on the first $4,000, I believe, of your income. And after $4,000, you didn't pay any FICA tax. And it was said at the time it would never get higher than that. The average life expectancy in 1934 in the United States was 65. So you could collect Social Security at 65, but the average life expectancy was 65. So you don't have to worry that many people are going to collect it. And we had a lot of people working for relatively few retirees. Now the life expectancy in the United States, depending on gender, zip code you were born in, a whole variety of factors, is somewhere in the low 80s, let's say. It could be as high as the mid 80s, some parts of the country, maybe high 70s and others, but it's a lot longer than 65. And then we have fewer people who are working to pay the people who are retired. So at some point, the Social Security system, as everybody knows, is going to be reshaped a bit because you can't afford what we promised people that we're going to give them. That's a big problem. And if we don't deal with that problem soon, we're going to have a gigantic problem on our hands. For example, the budget of the United States, a $7 trillion budget, 85% of that is entitlements, which is Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, and Social Security, defense spending, and interest on the debt. 85%. You only have 15% you can massage. And so if you don't deal with some of these issues at some point, you're going to not have a budget that's going to ever be credible anymore. And we've got to deal with it. You can't keep borrowing forever.
There are a couple other topics I wanted to get to, but staying on politics for just 1 second, because I do have to ask about tariffs. I mean, you obviously have hundreds of companies all over the world. I think obviously there's been a lot of, we're going to put the tariffs on, take them off, delay them, kick them down the road. This is a hard deadline. No, it isn't. But what are you seeing at this point? Because it seems like a lot of Americans have been told that this is going to be really bad, but so far the impact hasn't been nearly catastrophic as it first seemed on Liberation Day.
Most businesses that I'm familiar with have not yet decided to pass along the presumed cost of the tariffs because they're not sure if the tariffs are going to go into effect or not. And some businesses are willing to eat some of the costs, and some of the exporters are eating some of the costs and, in fact, keep lowering their prices a bit. So right now, the tariffs have not had the effect that many people predicted they would have. Maybe when all the tariffs are finally set and we know what they are, they'll have some impact. If tariffs are said to be inflationary, but we just don't know yet what the impact is because we don't really know what the tariffs are going to be, and therefore businesses haven't yet reset their pricing as much. The presumption is that it will have some inflationary impact. Tariffs usually are inflationary, but right now it hasn't had the impact that people thought because the tariffs haven't really gone into full effect yet.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So it's one of those things where it's like we'll see what happens, I guess, August 1st now, new deadline.
We don't know we don't really know what the impact will be yet. I would say that there were tariffs in the first term, but they didn't seem to have a gigantic inflationary impact. The inflation that came about the first part of the Trump term and the first part of the latter part of the Trump term, the first part of the Biden term, were probably due to COVID. Mm-hmm. In COVID, we expended about $5 trillion to deal with the problems of COVID, to avoid unemployment and avoid other problems, and ultimately that produced a fair amount of inflation.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you too, because we've got a couple questions here about philanthropy, your efforts there. Obviously, a lot of patriotic institutions, National Archives. You got I believe an upcoming museum, redoing it under the Jefferson Memorial. That sounds very cool. But you also have the Kennedy Center, which of course has been at the center of a lot of political turmoil lately. And we have a question from National Press Club member, Washington City paper reporter Vince Morris. Why did you agree to remain on the board after President Trump politicized the Kennedy Center establishment?
I first was put on the board by George W. Bush, and I served then as chairman was Steve Schwartzman. He served a 6-year term. After his term was up, I was reappointed by President Obama, and I served a total of 14 years as chairman. I served about 20 years on the board and 14 years as chair. My term, I decided to try to end my term at the end of last year, and there was a search for my successor. either people didn't want to follow me because they didn't want to pick a thing and clean up the mess I had made, perhaps, or whatever the reason. Nobody, there wasn't as easy to find somebody. There was somebody that we thought might do it, but in the end, the person decided not to do it. And so the board asked me to stay for 2 more years, and so I was willing to do that. But I thought 14 years as chairman of the Kennedy Center was enough. I think I'd given the Kennedy Center well over $100 million. We built the Reach, which is an addition to the Kennedy Center, and I thought the Kennedy Center was in reasonable shape, in large part due to the fact that we had a very good board on many people to help, and Deborah Rutter, who was the president, did a really good job. I had hired her with the search process, and she was now finishing her 10th year. And so I think she did an excellent job, and so I was happy with what I achieved, but I'm not perfect, and I made some mistakes and some things I could have done differently, and a lot of people always call me and said, you should give this person a Kennedy Center honor, or that person a Kennedy Center honor, but we had a committee of people doing it. It wasn't just me.
Well, what would you say to someone, I mean, given all that you've invested in the Kennedy Center, who says, look, I used to love to go to the Kennedy Center, I went to Reach, but now I don't want to go because it's become so politicized. What would your response to that person be?
It's politicized in the view of some and not in the view of others. I would say, I'm not sure there's anything I can productively say about the Kennedy Center. I did my part for 14 years. I think the Kennedy Center is a great organization, has been great. It was set up to be a living memorial to President Kennedy, and I admired President Kennedy, and I therefore was one of the reasons why I wanted to serve the Kennedy Center. There are some programs there that I think are not political, and people still attend them, and I can't judge for people whether they want to attend or not because of political things, but I felt I did my part, and now it's somebody else's turn to do it, and it's rare to be replaced by the President of the United States. So if the President of the United States wants a job you have, what am I going to say? So he has the job, and what can I say? I can't say I'm better than the President of the United States. So somebody else has it now, and I'm doing other things.
So you still, it sounds like you still feel like there's a lot at the Kennedy Center that's nonpartisan, out of politics, like still very consistent.
I think the Kennedy Center is best when it's nonpartisan. It's about always, we had a nonpartisan board. It's when I was there, I think it's best to be a nonpartisan kind of thing, but I'm not critical of what they're doing now. They haven't fully developed all the things they're going to do now. I don't know exactly what they're going to do. I think they're going to make some changes, and a lot of the people that I work with have gone, but we'll see what happens, and hopefully it'll be the best thing for the country if the Kennedy Center works well.
We've got another question on philanthropy from another National Press Club member and Forbes Leadership Strategy senior contributor, Edward Segal. He says, based on your experiences as a philanthropist, what advice do you have to share with business leaders about the importance of corporate philanthropy?
Well, corporate philanthropy is a phrase used for when corporations give money as opposed to individuals giving the money. At some firms like my firm, Carlyle, a lot of the founders and senior people in the firm who've made a fair amount of money have given away a fair amount of money. And my partners who started Carlyle with me have been very, very generous in the Washington area. But we tend to do it through our own foundations or personally, not make it a corporate philanthropy kind of effort. I think corporate philanthropy is good, but you remember when you're giving away money, but it's a publicly traded company, you're giving away shareholders' money as well. So you have to be sensitive to how much shareholder money you're giving away as opposed to giving away your own money. But I think some corporate philanthropy is always good, and Carlyle does do corporate philanthropy. But most of the philanthropy that have come out of the large private equity firms has probably come out of the individuals who are the founders of those firms giving away the money. But in the end, I think the benefit is still pretty good, whether it's being done from individuals or from corporations. I think philanthropy is an important part of society. When our country first started, we didn't have any money. And so this country started with a basis that we didn't have a wealthy church that was giving money to everybody to get things done like Europe did, or we didn't have a wealthy government or king that would give money to people for social needs. So people here had to pitch in and help each other, and that's why we had a lot of volunteer groups, volunteer associations, and we began a tradition of philanthropy. We are the most philanthropic country in the world by far. We give about 2% of GDP every year to philanthropy, which is by far the most in the world, and this tradition has continued quite some time, and I think philanthropy is a good thing. Philanthropy is a word that's derived from an ancient Greek word that means loving humanity. It doesn't mean rich people writing checks. And I like to remind people that philanthropy means you're helping other people. And you can help other people with your time. The most valuable thing you have is your time. You can always make more money if you're disposed to make more money, but you can't make more time. You have a finite amount of time. And so when people volunteer, I like to think that they're doing something valuable. I wish we would measure the amount of time people give. When people list a great philanthropist in this country, they should list people who've done things with their time as well as with their money. And I think that's an important thing to remember. I got involved with philanthropy because I grew up with no money to speak of. My father was a blue-collar worker and didn't have really any money, so we didn't really have philanthropy at home that much. But when I got lucky in the business world, I realized that I could give my money to my children and maybe spoil them, or I could wait until I die and then not see what's going to happen with my money and give it away then. But I thought the best thing to do was to give it away while I was alive, and I was one of the original 40 signers of the Giving Pledge. Bill Gates called me about the Giving Pledge. I thought it would sound like a good idea. So I decided to give away the bulk of my money, which I'm in the process of doing, and hopefully I'll live long enough to see some more gifts given.
I mean, is the landscape changing now that you have the government deciding not to fund, research projects, deciding not to fund, the corporate public broadcasting, deciding not to fund so many other things? Is this kind of changing the landscape about how you think about
Well, sure.
giving and charitable giving?
Certain things have been set up by the government to help public broadcasting, National Public Radio, National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, Kennedy Center, Smithsonian, National Gallery of Art. A lot of these organizations have gotten money from the federal government for cultural-related purposes. That money is now going down, and therefore there's an opportunity for philanthropy to do more than it had to do before. But these things go in cycles, and I suspect at some point, a few years from now, maybe the cycle will come back differently. It's hard to know exactly what will happen, but we have an advantage in philanthropy in this country in that we have a tax deduction. Most countries do not give you a tax deduction for a philanthropic gift. And fortunately, we have that, and that's probably one of the reasons why we're a very philanthropic country, not the only one. Clearly, there's some angst, but I wouldn't put it all on one administration or another. There have been sea changes in many different administrations have been against certain programs and cut them back and so forth. And remember, all the money that's spent, it really comes from appropriations from Congress, and Congress is going along with what the administration probably recommends. And so it's not just an administration that decides these things, it's all of Congress as well.
And I know we'll see, I think, next week whether Congress decides to rescind that $9.4 billion, including from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So they've got...
Well, so we'll see. I don't know what's going to happen.
We'll see. Stay tuned. We have another question. Someone asked, within the highest calling, the presidency itself, what do you think is the most important value a president can possess?
Well, no one thing, but the qualities that I think are important for a president are knowing where you want to take the country, being a leader. To be a leader, you have to project leadership. They say, this is where I want to take the country. So knowing what you want to do is very important. Secondly, having a capacity to get people to follow you, being able to communicate in a way that people follow you. If you're a leader and say, I want to take you here, but you can't convince people to follow you, you're not going to be a very effective president. I think another quality I think is very important is integrity. Integrity is very important. I think hard work is very important. I think humility is very important for leaders. I think Abraham Lincoln had a lot of faults, as he would say, but he had a lot of qualities that were very good, and one of them was humility. He didn't run around and say, look, I just signed the Emancipation Proclamation, aren't I great? He didn't do that. Or I just gave the Gettysburg Address, shouldn't you pat me on the back for that? So he's a man who I think I greatly admire Lincoln, but every president has his own style, and at some point we'll hopefully have a woman be president and she'll have her style, but it's different. Everybody is different, and you can't say there's only one type of person who should be president of the United States has certain qualities. Some people admire the qualities of President Trump. Some people don't admire the qualities of President Trump. Some people admire the qualities of President Biden. Some people don't. Every president has his supporters and his detractors, and it's not going to change.
Well, speaking of humility, we have a question about Elon Musk. What would be the impact of Elon Musk's America Party will have on the political landscape, and will his and Trump dynamic ultimately weaken Trump?
Well, when the country was first set up, we didn't have political parties, and George Washington thought it was a bad idea to have political parties. He didn't want political parties. We evolved into a system where we have two basic political parties, more or less. Though when Lincoln ran for president, we had actually 4 different parties, and Lincoln only got about 39% of the vote. So because we had 4 different parties then. In the 20th century, we pretty much have had 2 political parties, though Teddy Roosevelt ran on the Bull Moose Party and came in second. John Anderson ran in 1980. Ross Perot ran in 1992, I think it was. So we've had third parties for a while, but what we've learned over the years is that it's very difficult for a third party to sustain itself. The country seems quite happy with having 2 basic parties. So Elon Musk has a lot of money for sure, and if he's willing to put a lot of his money into really building a political organization the same way he built his companies, maybe he'll have some impact, but it's very difficult to think that the history of the United States is going to be changed by one person, because for the last 200 plus years, we've had essentially 2 political parties that matter. To think that one person can now put up enough money to make a third political party, I'm skeptical it can happen, but we'll see. I didn't think he could do the things he did in the business world, so I was wrong about that.
So it'll sort of be a...
I
mean, because there are a lot of rules against him. I mean, he's got the money for sure, but there's a lot of rules in our system that really make it difficult for third parties.
You need to have things that people believe in, and you need to get people to follow you, and you've got to be able to convince people that their life is going to be better if they follow this third party. And, we've got most people in the United States are registered to either a Democratic or Republican Party. It's hard to extract them from that. There are a lot of registered independents for sure, but I would say the jury is still out on whether any person, no matter how wealthy he or she is, can get a third party off the ground, but it's too early to say.
Yeah, well, we will watch and find out.
Time will tell.
When it comes, I know a number of years ago, there was a really big debate about how much business leaders should have a responsibility to speak up on major policy and social issues. You've seen this with a lot of companies, whether or not they support certain things, how public they are, how much they're willing to speak out. What do you believe that business leaders, what is their responsibility in that realm?
Well, the one school of thought, I'll call the Milton Friedman school of thought, is that CEOs have one job: to get the highest profits legally that you can do and maximize shareholder returns, and then basically let the shareholders do what they want with their money, philanthropy or other things. Another school of thought is that business leaders can be leaders of more than just their company they run. They can exercise influence over the political course of the country. Somewhere in between is probably the right way to handle it. I think many business people today are willing to speak out, and some are. Some are not as willing to do it because they have shareholders who don't want them to do that. They have shareholders who want them to just focus on making the company more profitable. So I would say business leaders are generally, right now, not as enamored with the idea of speaking out right now, as far as I can see. But business leaders have been willing to speak out in the past on dangerous subjects. A lot of business leaders opposed the Vietnam War. A lot of business leaders were involved in the civil rights movement and so forth. A lot of business leaders were involved in the equal rights movement. So I think business leaders over periods of time have tended to be fairly actively involved in some social issues, but they have to make sure that they're in the end running a company that's very profitable. I think entrepreneurs who built businesses probably have more flexibility because they are the shareholders, they built it, they really own the company, they really run it, and so they probably, more than CEOs who work their way up, have more freedom and flexibility to do these kind of things.
You mentioned, too, going back a little bit, when we were talking about sort of the biggest challenges that America faces, you mentioned China. I'm wondering specifically, how can the U.S. better compete with China at this point? What do we need to do to make sure that we continue to have our edge in technology, in the economy?
Well, no easy way to compete with China. China is, has 1.3 billion people, 1.4 billion people, much bigger population than we do. They have a government that is more easily able to control its population than we are able to control ours in terms of government telling people what to do. And I think what we have to do is remember what got us where we are, which is certain freedoms, certain liberties, a certain way of government, and not try to do what China is doing with its population, but let our strengths come to the fore and take advantage of our entrepreneurial spirit, our entrepreneurial capabilities, our good education system, our freedoms and liberties that we have. These are the things that made America great, and I think those are the things we should push forward, because those are the things that are likely to lead us into being a leader in the next century as well.
We also do have a question about Jay Powell, and they wanted to get your response. when it comes to Trump kind of undermining him, putting public pressure on him to lower interest rates, personal attacks, saying he's going to hire someone, basically a shadow Fed chair. Can you just sort of respond? What do you think? Is this setting a precedent, and is this dangerous for America and its financial institutions?
Jay Powell worked at Carlyle for 8 years, and I hired him when he was leaving the George Herbert Walker Bush administration, a very smart man. He left the firm and got involved in public policy and ultimately wound up as a member of the Fed, appointed initially by President Obama and then appointed the chairman by President Trump in his first term. Jay Powell has more restraint than I would have. People criticize me. I probably wouldn't be able to be as restrained as he has, so I admire him for his restraint. I just don't think I would be as restrained if I was as heavily criticized. But in the end, I look at this, his term this way. Jay Powell did not have an economics background, and he wasn't a PhD in economics. But I thought he did a pretty good job in this sense. One, he kept us out of a recession. We haven't had a recession while he's been there. Now, the Fed chair isn't the only person responsible for that, but he kept us, we haven't had a recession. Secondly, interest rates, inflation went very high. I think it went very high not because of anything he did, but because when COVID came, both administrations, the Trump administration and the Biden administration, injected $5 trillion in the economy without tax increases to pay for it. And so that was inflationary. If there was a mistake that was made by anybody, it was thinking that it was transitory because it lasted longer. Today, I think Jay Powell has made it clear that he wants to look at the data, but I give him a lot of credit for these things. It used to be the case that the Fed chairs never explained what they were doing before they were going to do it, and after they did it, they never had press conferences. And they also talked in what was called Fed speak, in language you can't really understand. And Jay Powell pretty much telegraphs what they're going to do before he does it, and afterwards he has a press conference within a half an hour and explains exactly what they did and why they did it. And I think it's educational. I think he's done a good job in that regard. You know, clearly President Trump is going to appoint somebody new. Jay's term is up in May of 26. I think Jay has decided that it wouldn't be good precedent for he to leave early and to kind of be pushed out. So he'll wait till May of 26 and then he'll leave. And then whoever his successor is will presumably have policies that maybe President Trump likes better. I don't know. But it's a tough job to have, and being criticized by the president isn't fun. There's no doubt about it.
But does it set a bad precedent for U.S. financial policy to see the president trying to put pressure on an agency that by design is supposed to be independent?
Well, it is independent, and so far it hasn't had the effect that was desired. So right now, I think Jay has shown that he's independent. But remember, Jay Powell doesn't make interest rate policies by himself. He's got an FOMC, a committee that actually makes the decisions. If he was the only one who didn't want to lower interest rates and the others did, they would get lowered. He can't do everything by himself. So it's unfair to just blame Jay Powell, in my view. He's got the entire FOMC agreeing to what they want to do. Now, there are some members who are now saying that maybe we should lower interest rates. And Jay Powell himself said not long ago that it may be possible we might have a lowered interest rate soon. But President Trump is not the first president that has criticized Fed chairs. This has happened before. I think it happened under Richard Nixon, Lyndon Johnson, and so forth. And as William McChesney Martin, who was chairman of the Fed, famously said, I think he was chair on the Fed under Kennedy and Johnson, said the job of the Fed chair is to take away the punch bowl at the party. And so his job is not to make people happy, and that's part of the territory. So if you can't stand the heat being Fed chair, you shouldn't take that job because it's not a job you're going to make a lot of friends at.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so like journalism then. Great. Yeah. Well,
it's not an easy job, and it's not a job that I, would wish to have myself, because it's a job that you're going to get criticized no matter what you do. If you don't increase interest rates, you do increase interest rates. It's not an easy job, for sure. And that's why they make the term relatively long, because they know you just can't make it a short term, because in short term you might make different decisions. Fed chairs are people, we generally have had pretty good Fed chairs over the course of our country's history. Some of the best people in the country who know the subject matter have served in that capacity, and we owe them a lot of gratitude. Ben Bernanke, Janet Yellen, Alan Greenspan, Paul Volcker, William McChesney Martin. They were some extraordinary people. Mm-hmm.
Since we are at the National Press Club, I wanted to ask you a question about both private equity and journalism, because over the years, we have seen a number of journalism newsrooms and organizations be brought by private equity. We've seen a number of layoffs follow that, and we've actually seen, there was a study from NYU that showed that for the newsrooms that were bought up by private equity, there were fewer local stories and local coverage. And I wanted to see if you are concerned at all about private equity buying up media groups and even the future of media and the press with some of the attacks that we've seen today.
When I get up in the morning, that isn't my biggest worry, to be honest. But we've seen a lot of wealthy individuals buy media properties, not private equity related people, and those media properties have had challenges as well. We've seen publicly traded companies that are not private equity owned buy media properties, and they've had challenges as well. So tell me the perfect way to run a newspaper in this environment. Very difficult. The newspaper world is vanishing in many ways. We used to have many more newspapers. It's now a very difficult business in which to operate. So I wouldn't blame private equity people as much as the circumstances, because people today getting their news out of social media more than they are getting it from newspapers. I'm an old person, and I read newspapers. I read 5 papers every day, and I read them actually the old-fashioned way, buying them and actually reading the paper as opposed to online. And so the hardest thing I have is finding newspapers. I can go cities in this country, and I can go to major cities, and I can't find a single place you can buy a newspaper anymore. And sometimes people laugh at me when I say, "Can you have any newspapers here?" And they laugh. They don't even know what it is. So I love newspapers. I haven't bought any newspapers myself. I don't want to damage them because private equity people might damage them, as you suggest. But I think newspapers are wonderful, but we don't need them quite the way we did before because people read them online. I don't think private equity people do anything worse to newspapers or better to newspapers than publicly traded companies or wealthy individuals. There are a number of wealthy individuals who've bought newspapers, and they're no better off or worse off than the private equity firms. So I think it's unfair to blame private equity firms for the sins of newspapers, the problems that newspapers have. People just aren't reading them anymore. That's one of the problems. That's the biggest problem.
Do you have any thought, as someone who does read a lot of newspapers, and I'll take the paper component out of it, just reads a lot of news. Right. What are your thoughts on kind of what the industry needs to do to financially survive at this point? Because obviously you understand the value of information. That can't go away, but someone's got to be paid to do the reporting and the writing and the editing and whatnot.
Well, clearly the newspapers and publications are surviving. They're making their money on conferences. That the newspaper business has become a conference business to some extent, at least some of them have been. And I think you have to diversify and change, but you have to adapt to your audience. Younger people, my 2 daughters went to Harvard. They're very smart, well-educated. They don't read paper newspapers. They read stuff online. And I have, one of my children gets her news from something called LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a newspaper, I guess. I don't know. I thought it was an employment service or something. But here they get their LinkedIn, or they read Facebook to get their news. I'm not a member of Facebook or LinkedIn or any of these things. But apparently younger people are getting the news from these kind of things, and they just don't need newspapers. It's a foreign world to me, and I just don't understand it.
I could, if you ever want me to explain, I'm happy to bring you through the LinkedIn. Just post it on there today.
But I'm not looking for a job right now.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what I thought LinkedIn was supposed to be, help you get a job. But now it's more than, it's a news service now, right?
It has an algorithm, and it's kind of like Facebook or X in the sense that
it's owned by Microsoft, and I'm sure they're figuring out how to monetize. They paid a lot of money for it, and it's a good company, but I'm not a subscriber. Myself, somebody does some LinkedIn things for me, but I'm really not on it myself.
I did want to ask about the Orioles, just because I know we have a lot of folks in here who are big fans. Obviously, they made the playoffs the last 2 years in a row. This season started with a lot of high hopes, and those hopes are less high right now. In May, you fired manager Brandon Hyde. What's your outlook for the rest of the season, and what are some of your long-term goals with the Orioles?
Well, I bought the Orioles because I grew up in Baltimore, and I felt that I had given away a fair amount of money in my adopted second city, which is Washington. And I thought I had done a lot of philanthropic things that I thought were somewhat useful and made me happy, made my parents happy. But I didn't do as much for Baltimore, my hometown. And my parents were raised in Baltimore. They were married in Baltimore. They raised me in Baltimore. They're buried in Baltimore. I was raised in a public education and school system there. I enjoyed my time growing up in Baltimore. I will be buried in Baltimore as well. And I kind of thought I should have done more for Baltimore than I had done. I've been on the board of Johns Hopkins and Johns Hopkins Medicine, given some money there, but not anything close to what I maybe should have done. So I just thought this was a way to kind of give back to Baltimore, and I thought it would be a way of help revitalizing Baltimore. Baltimore has a lot of challenges. When I was growing up, it was the 9th biggest city in the United States. Now it's not in the top 20 in terms of population. Many of the corporate headquarters have gone. There's a lot of crime-related issues and other kinds of social problems in Baltimore that they've had that they're now dealing with, but it's a challenged city in some ways. And I thought that reviving the Orioles in one way, if I could do that, would be helpful to Baltimore, help revive the downtown area. We're in the process of rebuilding the stadium. The famous Camden Yards is being modernized. And so I just thought that was why I did it. And the first 2 years, the year I bought it, we did okay, not as well as we did the year before I bought it. This year has not worked out that well. We have a lot of injuries. We lead the major leagues, I think, in injuries. And, what are you supposed to say to a young person who injures his arm? You can't say go out and play, your arm is injured. Mm-hmm. So it's difficult. And I'm not able to coach these players very much. I can't tell them what to do. I'm 75. These guys are 21, 22 years old. I mean, I'm so much older than them. I don't really have a hard time getting to them.
You got to post on LinkedIn.
Well, I've made like, for example, I one time got them there early on the game. I said I had to make a speech for somebody on prostate cancer, and one of the young players said, well, what's a prostate? And I said, you'll find out eventually. But so these people are younger. So I leave the baseball to the baseball professionals. My job is to be the owner. It's to help with ticket sales, commercial things, take the blame when something goes wrong. But in the end, you've got professional baseball players, managers, general managers, and they know what they're doing. And baseball is a game of some injuries and so forth. But we have a very good team. We have good players. We won 3 games in a row against the Atlanta Braves the other day. We're going to play the Mets soon, and I think we have a reasonable good chance in the second half of doing much, much better.
All right. Well, we will be watching. We do have a question from another National Press Club member, and Dan, I'm going to butcher your last name here. Dan Ranane, hopefully. The payroll disparity between teams in the MLB is dramatic. Should there be a salary cap or salary floor to maintain competitiveness in the league like the NFL does?
Well, time will tell whether there will be a change or not. I think there's a general consensus in the country, but I can't really speak for the whole country, that we need more equilibrium. We want every team to feel when they begin the season they have a chance to, no matter whether you're in a small city or a big city, to win a World Series. We have 30 major league teams, and you want the fans in all 30 cities or 30 teams that feel that at the beginning of the season they have a chance to win. And right now, the polling data suggests that many people don't feel their smaller town teams probably have as much of a chance against the bigger town teams. So I think more equilibrium is probably what people want. That's what we see. We'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm. We have a couple more questions from the audience. One of them on the stock market. Why is the stock market shrugging off so many Trump administration actions that would seem to weaken the economy?
Well, you can always say the market knows what it's doing, or you can say the market is not a good indicator. Who knows? Trying to figure out why the market does certain things is difficult to do. Right now, I think the market, my guess is saying that the tariffs are not going to have the deleterious effect that was predicted. The fact that the big, beautiful bill got passed and has many things in there that many people in Wall Street like is probably a factor. Right now, there doesn't seem to be a recession on the horizon. Inflation seems to be coming down a bit. It's expected widely on Wall Street now that interest rates will come down this year 1 or 2 times. So I think that's probably why the market is feeling reasonably good about the economy.
We also have another question. What do you think about the issue of income inequality in the United States, and what should be done to intervene?
If I knew that, I would be in Iowa and New Hampshire. It's not easy. Income inequality is getting worse, not better in the United States. There's no doubt about it. And let me give you one of the reasons why I think it is. 14% of the people in this country are functionally illiterate, which means they can't read past the 4th grade level. There are many reasons for that. School system can be blamed. It could be on many different things. But we let people drop out of high school, and sometimes they never go back and get a degree. So right now, 80% of the people in this country who are in the juvenile delinquency system are functionally illiterate. 2/3 of the people in this country who are in federal prisons are functionally illiterate. Why is that? Well, if you're functionally illiterate, you have a hard time getting a job, and what are you going to do? You can't get a job. How many people want to hire somebody who's functionally illiterate? Can't read past the 4th grade level. We've got to do a better job of getting people to learn how to read. I've supported programs at the Library of Congress to reward great literacy groups, but that's just a drop in the bucket. We've got a lot of good literacy groups out there, but we've got to do more to get people to read. And one of the reasons we have a lot of crime, there are many reasons, but if we could get a higher level of literacy in this country, I think crime would go down a bit. Now, crime is a function of demographics as much as anything else, but I think literacy is one factor that I'll mention as an important one. So
how do we get more people to read?
Well, you got better school systems. Parents are very important. Now, most people learn how to read from their parents if they have parents or their guardians. In fact, one of the programs the program that I set up at the Library of Congress gave an award out to a program, thanking them for doing it. It's a cash award that they give out. And the program seemed very clever at the time. Now it doesn't seem as unusual, but it's a very good program. And the program was this. It was the parents teach their kids to read. I mean, obviously you learn in school, but teaching your kids to read and doing it at home is a very important factor. But if your mother or father are on military assignment and they're out of the country, how do you sit down with your child and read? Well, a couple years ago, a group came together, a literacy group, and they kind of, in effect, came up with a Zoom process where your father, let's say, or mother, if he or she was overseas on a military assignment, would be able to use, in effect, a Zoom to read to their child at night or whatever time of day and give the same benefit that you would have as if you were at home. And that was something I think is helpful. So if parents don't teach their children to read, I think it's harmful. And parents need to spend time helping their kids to read. That's another factor.
Got it. Well, I know we are about at time, but before
one final thing about interviews.
Yeah.
So I started a program a number of years ago to help educate members of Congress about American history on the theory that they're making the laws, maybe they should know more about American history. And it starts about 10 years ago. And basically at the Library of Congress, once a month, more or less once a month, I have a program where I interview a great American scholar. So it would be David McCullough, Doris Kearns Goodwin, people like that. And members of Congress come. We get about 250 to come each time. And they love it because there's no press there, sorry, but therefore they can feel free to sit with members of the opposite party and not be criticized. And they can see people from the opposite house. We don't have conference committees anymore because no major legislation goes to conference anymore. And therefore, people in the House and people in the Senate don't know each other. We don't have as many congressional delegations flying around the world anymore, so they don't really bond with people from the opposite house. And they don't really they're not really allowed in a public setting to sit down and talk and have dinner with people from the opposite party as much. So this is no press, and we come, and I have done it for a while. And then one time I said, maybe the members should learn more about the judiciary. So I asked the Chief Justice, who I'd known from the Smithsonian, if I could interview him in front of all the members of Congress. And he said yes. So I sat down, and at the beginning I said, Mr. Chief Justice, did you always want to be Chief Justice of the United States? And he said, well, no. I said, when you were a little boy, did you want to be a judge? No. Well, did you want to be a lawyer? No. When you were a little boy, what did you want to be? I wanted to be an American history professor. All I cared about was American history. My father said, John, you'll starve to death. There's no money being an American history professor. You won't be able to support a family. And John said, I don't really care. I just want to be an American history professor. I love American history. So I went to Harvard, and he majored in American history. So he came back from spring break one time, gets out from the airport at Boston, Logan Airport, gets into a cab and says to the cab driver, can you take me to Cambridge? And the cab driver looked at him and said, are you a student at Harvard? Yes, I am. What are you majoring in? I'm majoring in American history. And the cab driver said, well, when I was a student at Harvard, that's what I majored in also. So John decided to go to law school.
That was a fantastic story. You know, we're supposed to ask one final question after I do this. Well, I'm going to do the close, and then I'm going to ask for that. But that was really good. So now I'm going to have to think of a better final question. Well, I just want to take a moment, though, to thank the Headliners team. They're the ones who put on this event. Jen Judson, if you're out there, she's our chair. Thank you so much to Jen. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to our executive director, Didier Soji. Thank you so much to Cecily, to all of our fantastic staff who helped put these events on. And just a heads up, mark your calendars. July 10th, we are hosting best-selling author and award-winning journalist Michael Grunwald, who will discuss his new book, We Are Eating the Earth, The Race to Fix Our Food System and Save Our Climate. We hope you will join us for that. And of course, as always, honored to present with you the National Press Club's mug.
Thank you. Now I have everything. Thank you.
Hope you will.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. And if I can close with one.
Last, what is your favorite, I guess you gave a fun fact about a Chief Justice. What is your favorite presidential fact? Any president favorite fact?
That Jimmy Carter didn't fire me after 4 years. He gave me 4 years to be there. I would say George Washington set the tone for everybody. He could have stayed forever, but he set the tone of not doing that. Abraham Lincoln, I'll tell you one Abraham Lincoln story. This is a tragic situation. Abraham Lincoln had a complicated wife, and he was touring Northern Virginia at the end of the Civil War. And Julia Grant, the wife of Ulysses S. Grant, was there. And Mrs. Lincoln yelled at Mrs. Grant because Mrs. Grant had sat down on a boat, apparently before Mrs. Lincoln had come in and didn't show proper respect, according to some people at the time. And so Mrs. Lincoln was very upset with Mrs. Grant, and Mrs. Grant came back and said, I don't really want to deal with Mrs. Lincoln again. 2 days later, President Lincoln offers Ulysses S. Grant the chance to see a show with him, our American Cousin, at Ford's Theater. Mrs. Grant said, I'm not going to be with that woman. We got to get an excuse. So they said they had to go visit their child, their son, in New Jersey. So had Ulysses S. Grant been at Ford's Theater that night, he would have had 20 military people around him, and there was no doubt that John Wilkes Booth wouldn't have gotten in, I think. So sad situation. And a final story I'll tell you very briefly. My other favorite story from a prominent person is that President Kennedy has the Kennedy School named after him at Harvard. And after the tragic death of his son, John Kennedy Jr., the forum where people speak at the Kennedy School was named the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. And the rule there is anybody can speak who is invited, but you have to answer questions. You can't just speak and get off the stage. So at one point, Mikhail Gorbachev comes after he's president of the Soviet Union, and he's speaking, translated by his daughter into English. He didn't speak English. And after he spoke, he had one question. A bright young student asked him, Mr. Gorbachev, how would the world have been different if John Kennedy had not been assassinated on November 22nd, 1963, but Nikita Khrushchev had been assassinated on that date? How would the world be different? And without missing a beat, Gorbachev said, well, look, nobody can say for certain how it would be different, but one thing you can say for certain is that Aristotle Onassis would not have married Mrs. Khrushchev. Probably true.
Probably true.
Okay.
David Rubenstein, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic.
Okay? Yes. Okay. Okay.